I'm done.
Sending good vibes, you guys. It's Mrs. Klein.
And Mr. Creighton. We're here with your podcast for Lesson 5, The Decline of Feudalism. The essential question: how did events in Europe contribute to the decline of feudalism and the rise of democratic thought?
Right here are the vocabulary terms you should know: bubonic plague, habeas corpus, heretic, 100 Years' War, Magna Carta, and model parliament.
All right, guys. The first section is political developments in England. Political development was rampant during the Middle Ages, and in one country, England, developments during the 12th and 13th centuries helped to weaken feudalism. The story begins with King Henry II, who reigned from 1154 to 1189.
All right, so Henry made legal reforms a central concern of his reign. For example, he insisted that a jury formally accuse a person of a serious crime. Cases were then tried before a royal judge. In theory, people could no longer simply be jailed or executed for no legal reason, but had to go through a court trial as well, which is a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
All right, these reforms strengthened the power of royal courts at the expense of feudal lords.
Henry's efforts to strengthen royal authority led to a serious conflict with the Catholic Church. In 1199, Henry's youngest son, John, became King of England. In June 1215, angry nobles forced a meeting with King John in a meadow called Runnymede, beside the River Thames outside of London. There, they insisted that John put a seal on a document called the Magna Carta, which means Great Charter in Latin.
All right, in many ways, you guys, the Magna Carta only protected the rights and privileges of nobles. However, as time passed, the English people came to regard it as one of the foundations of their rights and liberties.
All right, the impact of political developments in England. These political changes contributed to the decline of feudalism in two ways. Some of the changes strengthened royal authority at the expense of the nobles. Others eventually shifted some power to the common people. All of these ideas form the basis for the development of our modern democratic institutions.
All right, now the plague definitely plays a part in bringing an end to feudalism. In addition to political developments in England, another reason for the decline of feudalism was the bubonic plague, which affected all of Europe. The bubonic plague first struck Europe from 1346 to 1351. It returned in waves that occurred about every decade into the 15th century, leaving major changes in its wake.
Historians suspect that the plague began in Central Asia, possibly in China, and spread throughout China, India, the Middle East, and eventually to Europe.
Symptoms or signs of the Black Plague, you guys, included fever, vomiting, fierce coughing and sneezing fits, and egg-sized swellings or bumps called buboes. The term Black Death probably came from these black and blue swellings that appeared on the skin of victims.
The dirty conditions in which people lived contributed significantly to the spread of the bubonic plague. Terrified people falsely blamed the plague on everything from the positions of the planets to lepers and to Jews.
Some historians estimate that 24 million Europeans died of the plague, about a third of the entire population. The deaths of so many people accelerated or sped up changes in Europe's economic and social structure, which contributed to the decline of feudalism.
After the plague, there was a shift in power from nobles to the common people. One reason for this change was a desperate need for workers because so many people had died. After the plague, a number of peasant rebellions broke out. When nobles tried to return to the system from before the plague, resentment exploded across Europe.
All right, last but not least, you guys, there's some information about the 100 Years' War. Between 1337 and 1453, England and France fought a series of battles for control over lands in France. Known as the 100 Years' War, this long conflict contributed to the erosion of feudalism in England and in France.
English monarchs had long claimed lands in France. This was because earlier English kings had actually been feudal lords over these French fiefs. French kings now disputed these claims.
Despite often being outnumbered, the English won most of the early battles of the war. All right, but the French decide they're going to fight back. And the French slowly chip away at the territory that the English had won in the early years of the war.
Another reason for increased French resistance was a new sense of national identity and unity. In part, the French were inspired by a 17-year-old peasant girl, which is crazy to think, known today as Joan of Arc. In 1429, Joan led a French army to victory in the Battle of Orleans.
The English pushed certain church leaders to accuse Joan of being a witch and a heretic and to burn her at the stake, which is what they end up doing.
Yeah. Joan of Arc's heroism changed the way many French men and women felt about their king and nation. The impact of the 100 Years' War. The 100 Years' War contributed to the decline of feudalism by helping to shift power from feudal lords to monarchs and to common people.
In addition, changes in military technology reduced the need for nobles, knights, and castles. This new feeling of nationalism also shifted power away from lords.
In both France and England, Commoners and peasants both bore the heaviest burden of the war. Those who survived the war, however, were needed as soldiers and workers. For this reason, the common people emerged from the conflict with greater influence and power.
All right, you guys, the summary really quickly. All right, there were some political developments in England, mainly that Henry II's legal reforms strengthened English common law and the role of judges and juries. The Magna Carta established the idea of rights and liberties that even a monarch could not violate. It also affirmed that monarchs should rule with the advice of the governed. Edward I's model parliament gave a voice in government to common people as well as to nobles.
Now with the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague killed about 1/3 of the people of Europe. After the plague, the need for workers to rebuild Europe led to a slight shift in power from feudal lords to the common people.
All right, and then the 100 Years' War was a series of battles between England and France that caused a rise in national pride and identity in both countries. It strengthened the monarchs and began to reduce the importance of nobles and knights on the battlefield.
Remember, guys, you're going to have a quiz coming up pretty soon.
All right, Kate, love you. Bye.
I feel